Welcome to This Week in Leadership Research, episode 11. This week, let's talk about potential detrimental effects of organizations' diversity rhetoric. I'll try to answer a question. Do organizations' justifications in favor of diversity attract underrepresented group members? This is the question posed in an article titled "The Business Case for Diversity Backfires: Detrimental Effects of Organizations' Instrumental Diversity Rhetoric for Underrepresented Group Members' Sense of Belonging." The article was published in Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Interpersonal Relations, and Group Processes in 2022. The link of the article is in the description of this video. Many organizations have made public statements in support for diversity, often by explaining why they care about diversity. In the article I introduced today, researchers investigated those justifications' content, prevalence, and consequences for underrepresented groups. The researchers categorized organizations' justifications for diversity into two categories. The business case for diversity refers to an instrumental rhetoric claiming that diversity is valuable for organizational performance. What does instrumental mean here? It means the rhetoric that diversity is valuable because of its direct or indirect benefits for organizational performance. The focus is on organizational performance. Diversity is valuable for organizational performance. An example is this diversity statement. Inclusion and diversity are fundamental to the success of our company because innovation requires breakthrough ideas that only come from a diverse workforce. That's the diversity statement in 2020. Here is the most recent diversity statement in 2022. Using our diversity as a competitive advantage to push boundaries of science and deliver life-changing medicine to patients. In this statement, diversity is a means to an end, and the end is to gain competitive advantage for organizations, which is instrumental for the success of an organization. It is also instrumental for a diverse workforce to come up with breakthrough innovative ideas. This is why we call this type of diversity statements instrumental rhetoric. Organizational leaders' instrumental diversity statements may be driven by private motives. People tend to use organizational performance to evaluate leadership effectiveness. The more successful an organization is, the more effective a leader may appear. The fairness case for diversity refers to a non-instrumental rhetoric justifying diversity as the right thing to do. Unlike the instrumental rhetoric that focuses on organizational performance, the non-instrumental rhetoric focuses on the message that diversity is valuable in and of itself without explicitly connecting it to benefits for the organizations. Here is an example. We embrace diversity because it's our culture and because it's the right thing to do. In this statement, diversity is inherently valuable on the grounds of fairness and social justice principles. What type of organizations' diversity statements are more prevalent? Which type of organization's diversity statements reduces underrepresented group members' sense of belonging to the organizations, which in turn undermine organizations' diversity goals? To answer those questions, the researchers investigated the Fortune 500 companies. Those companies collectively employ about 29 million people worldwide. The researchers went to each company's website and find the company's diversity and inclusion webpage. If a company does not have a dedicated diversity and inclusion webpage, or if the webpage did not contain any diversity justification, the researchers search for the company's diversity justification on its careers page in corporate articles published on its website. And as a last resort, on the company's blog. Among the Fortune 500 companies, 18% of the companies did not have a diversity justification. They either did not talk about diversity on their website or talk about it without providing any justification for why diversity mattered to them. For example, by providing their diversity statistics and describing their diversity programs. For the rest of 410 companies, researchers use an algorithm to group them into two categories: the business case for diversity justification and the fairness case. The researchers reported that the business case is far more prevalent than the fairness case among the Fortune 500 companies. Specifically, 404 of the Fortune 500 companies made a business case for diversity. Only 6 companies, which was 1% of the Fortune 500 companies, made a fairness case for diversity. This result can be explained by institutional theory. If you want to know what institutional theory is, please check out my earlier video on Game of Theory's institutional theory. Here I demonstrate how to use institutional theory to explain the prevalence of a business case for diversity. According to institutional theory, organizational practices disseminate within industries over time, not because their presumed effectiveness, but because of the legitimacy and status that they confer to organizations who adopt them. Once well-established organizations, which are at the center of an industry, make diversity justification, other organizations, which are on the periphery of the industry, seek to gain legitimacy and status by mimicking the practices of central organizations. This mimicry process ultimately leads to the wide dissemination of practices adopted by central organizations and ultimately to a homogenization of business practices across organizations. Some agencies have been publishing diversity reports about making a business case for diversity in organizations. To make a good diversity report, organizations are incentivized to make diversity statements that focus on organizational performance rather than focusing on doing the right thing. The researchers also reported that the business case for diversity justification undermines represented groups' anticipated sense of belonging to, and thus interest in joining organizations, an effect driven by social identity threat. All organizations' diversity justification raises the salience of group memberships. Instrumental diversity justifications, which focus on benefits for organizational performance, may represent a contextual cue of social identity threat. Those instrumental diversity justifications can function as a cue that exacerbates the concern about being devalued based on one's group membership because they justify forming expectations about and evaluating individuals' contributions at work through the lens of their social identities. According to the theory of social identity threat, instrumental diversity justifications could be more identity threatening than non-instrumental diversity justifications to members of underrepresented groups hoping to join organizations. The instrumental diversity justification sends a message that diversity improves organizational performance through the unique skills, perspectives, interaction styles, communication styles, and work styles that underrepresented individuals bring to the table as a result of their distinct life experiences. On the surface, this instrumental rhetoric may sound positive, especially for women and members of the underrepresented groups whose contributions have historically been devalued. However, the instrumental rhetoric uniquely ties specific social identities to specific contributions in the workplace, and in so doing justifies attending to individuals' social identities when forming expectations about and evaluating their work. The instrumental rhetoric could implicitly send a message to underrepresented group members that their social identities will be a relevant lens through which their contributions to the organization will be evaluated. The focus of diversity justification on organizational performance is more detrimental to the underrepresented group members' sense of belonging. They may be less interested in joining the organizations, which in turn yields an outcome that is at odds with the organization's espoused desire to become more diverse. As a result, the seemingly positive cues in organizations' well-intentioned justifications for diversity can have identity-threatening consequences. Instrumental justifications for diversity can threaten underrepresented group members and women and thereby undermine organizations' diversity goals. By comparison, the fairness case for diversity justification does not tie people's social identities to how their contribution to the organizations will be evaluated. The non-instrumental diversity justifications do not provide a justification for attending to individuals' social identities when evaluating or forming expectations about their contributions to the organization. As a result, the fairness case would minimize social identity threat and thereby better sustain underrepresented groups' anticipated sense of belonging to and interest in joining an organization. The researchers conducted 6 studies. Their findings suggest that despite its seemingly positivity, the most prevalent organization's justification for diversity functions as a cue of social identity threat that paradoxically undermines belonging across LGBTQ plus professionals, female job seekers in science, technology, engineering, and math fields, and African Americans. Those underrepresented groups' low level of sense of belonging becomes a barrier for organizations to achieve their diversity goals. How to apply the findings of this week's article to leadership practices? Well-intentioned diversity justifications and efforts may have a detrimental effect on underrepresented group members, posing a social identity threat, lowering their sense of belonging and their interest in joining an organization, and ultimately undermine the organization's diversity goals. There has been research that investigated whether demographic diversity actually led to higher organizational performance. The results were mixed. Demographic diversity does not automatically translate itself to organizational performance. Meta-analysis on nearly 50 years of data have found weak evidence for a link between demographic diversity and superior organizational performance, whether at the team level or the board level. The research has shifted to investigate what factors or moderators to explain the mixed effects of demographic diversity on organizational performance. The findings in this week's article uncovered the detrimental impact of an instrumental justification for diversity. The findings do not mean that organizations should abandon their commitment to diversity. Instead, the findings suggest that organizations, particularly organizational leaders, need to pay special attention to how to justify their diversity goals and efforts. If you're a researcher, I hope the article I introduced today can offer some inspirations for your research. If you are a leader or aspire to be a leader, I hope this article can guide you in your leadership practices. Stay open-minded, get inspired, and never stop improving your leadership skills. I'll see you next week in This Week in Leadership Research.